I still remember the sound of the pen hitting the lawyer's wooden table. A tiny click, barely louder than a raindrop, yet it felt like a gunshot cracking open the life I thought I understood. There are moments in a person's life when the world doesn't explode, it simply tilts, quietly, and suddenly nothing sits where it used to. That sound, that tiny sound, was the moment my entire life slipped off its axis. My children sat across from me, straight-backed and glowing with anticipation. They looked almost ceremonial in their posture, like royalty waiting to be crowned. Their clothes were crisp, their shoes polished, their eyes bright and alert. They weren't mourning their father anymore, not really. They were waiting for the confirmation of what they already believed, that his life's work was their reward. That I, the woman who stood beside him for 41 years, was just an accessory to his journey, not a partner in his success. The lawyer cleared his throat, the kind of practiced throat clear that comes from reading thousands of wills to thousands of eager or devastated faces. He adjusted his glasses, shuffled the crisp papers in front of him, and began. 18 million, he announced, his voice smooth and detached, as if he were listing ingredients on a soup can. Business shares, properties, insurance policies, long-term investments. My daughter leaned forward slightly, catching the number like a jewel tossed across a table. My son smiled softly, trying and failing to look modest. They already saw the future: vacations, cars, houses, new furniture, maybe even early retirement. I could almost see the dreams inflating behind their eyes. All divided equally among the 3 children, the lawyer continued. My fingers tightened around the armrest of my chair. I felt something cold slide down the back of my neck. Disappointment, confusion, fear, I couldn't tell. My husband had always been a careful man. He had always believed in fairness. He would never leave me unprotected. He promised me that much, so many times that I had grown to believe the words were woven into the very air between us. Yet here I was, sitting in a room where my entire future depended on what came next. My hands began to shake, lightly at first, then harder, like they remembered something my mind hadn't caught up to yet. And for the surviving spouse, the lawyer read, pausing just long enough for my children to lift their eyes to me, there are no financial allocations. No one moved. No one gasped. No one protested. My children didn't even flinch. They didn't ask, why? They didn't look confused. They didn't say, there must be a mistake. There was no disbelief. No sadness. No concern. Instead, something far worse happened. A small, soft laugh broke the silence. It came from my eldest daughter, the one I once believed had inherited her father's empathy. She placed her manicured hand on mine, a gesture that should have felt comforting but instead felt like being petted. She tilted her head and smiled with a gentleness so rehearsed it bordered on mockery. Mom, you don't need money, she said, voice dripping with the sweetness people use when speaking to a confused child. We'll decide what you can spend. Don't worry about anything. Her brothers laughed. Not loudly, but casually. That was the worst part, the casualness. As if they weren't laughing at me, but at some amusing situation that had nothing to do with human dignity. They reacted as if a natural order had simply been confirmed. As if I wasn't their mother, but an aging responsibility they would now manage. A heat rose in my chest, something tight and painful. I looked at their faces, the faces I had kissed when they were sick, the faces I had fed, clothed, protected, and fought for. And all I saw were strangers rehearsing how to divide the world they believed they deserved. I realized in that moment that they had already divided it long before the will was read. And me? I wasn't included in their picture. The lawyer continued speaking, his voice fading into a distant hum. My mind drifted somewhere else, somewhere quieter, somewhere safer. I tried to understand. My husband was a meticulous man, a planner, a thinker, a protector. He would never leave me behind. It wasn't possible. It wasn't him. But then, a memory surfaced. A memory so soft, so quiet, I hadn't thought about it in years. The last week of his life, a dimly lit hospital room, the smell of antiseptic, his frail hand gripping mine. His voice barely a whisper, like a candle flame flickering in a storm. "Anna, if they ever fail you, the truth will find you." I had brushed it off at the time. He was tired, medicated, drifting in and out of clarity. I thought he meant something spiritual, divine justice, or fate, or the way truth eventually surfaces like a bubble rising to the top of water. But now, sitting in that office, his voice wrapped itself around my heart like a hand pulling me upright. Because they had failed me. Every one of them. And something inside me, something quiet but powerful, told me the truth he spoke of wasn't metaphorical. It was real. Tangible. Hidden somewhere in the house we built together. Waiting. Waiting for this exact moment. The lawyer finished reading. My children stood up immediately, celebrating under their breaths, already discussing who would handle which accounts, who would take over which part of the business, how they would manage the property taxes now that they were the owners. They didn't even look at me as they left the room. Not one of them asked if I was okay. Not one asked if I needed a ride home. Not one paused to wonder how their father's wife, their mother, ended up with nothing. I remained seated, fingers trembling, staring at the papers on the table. Paper that defined inheritance, legacy, honor. Paper that declared me invisible. The lawyer placed a hand on my shoulder as he gathered his files. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Harrison," he murmured. "These things, they happen." "No. They don't. Not like this. Not unless someone planned it. Not unless someone hid something." I walked out of the building slowly, as if my bones carried an extra decade of age. The sun outside was too bright, the air too sharp, the street too loud. My body moved, but my mind remained in the shadows of a hospital room, hearing my husband's last whisper again and again. "Anna, if they ever fail you, the truth will find you." And I felt it, a pull. A magnetic tug from my own home. A promise that something was waiting. Something my children didn't know existed. If you've ever trusted the wrong people, then stay with me. Because what happened next didn't just change my life, it shattered everything my children thought they owned. People look at a family from the outside and imagine warmth, unity, and shared memories. But the truth is, families are built on small, invisible sacrifices, tiny pieces of yourself you give away without keeping score. I never kept score. I never tracked the hours, the dollars, the tears, or the sleepless nights. I believed motherhood was about giving without expecting anything in return. Maybe that was my mistake. Or maybe it was theirs. After my husband's first heart attack, everything changed. He was a strong man once, broad-shouldered, loud laugh, hands that could fix anything. But when he fell on the kitchen floor that night, gasping for breath, gripping the edge of the counter like the world was slipping away, I realized I was about to become both mother and father in a single heartbeat. He survived the attack, but he never returned to who he once was. His strength faded. His energy dwindled. And suddenly, every responsibility shifted onto me. I worked nights at a grocery store, stocking shelves until my back felt carved out of stone. I worked days at a sewing shop, stitching hems, repairing buttons, patching uniforms. There were months where the only sleep I got was the kind that sneaks up on you during a bus ride, those brief, weightless moments when exhaustion shuts down your body whether you allow it or not. But I did it. I kept going. Because my children needed me. My oldest daughter was entering college then. She had dreams of becoming a nurse. Dreams cost money, money we didn't have. I filled out forms, chased down scholarships, and when that wasn't enough, I worked double shifts. I sold the gold bangles my mother left me. I pawned the necklace my husband had given me on our 10th anniversary. I told her I didn't wear jewelry anymore. I lied. I sold memories so she could build her future. My middle son struggled through his teenage years. He fought with teachers, ran with the wrong crowd, and once nearly got expelled. I went to every meeting. Every late-night call. Every emergency. I sat in police stations after midnight, talking to officers, begging for leniency. I paid for therapy sessions, school programs, and the damages he caused during one particularly reckless night. Now he calls me irresponsible if I forget to turn off a light. My youngest was sensitive, gifted but fragile. He developed a medical condition in his early teens, treatable but expensive. So I paid for specialists. I drove hours to hospitals. I learned every symptom, every warning sign, every medication dose. I was the one who sat beside him through the fevers, through the hospital stays, through the fear. I watched him sleep with wires and tubes attached to him, my hand shaking as I prayed he'd survive the night. College came next. Then apartments. Then cars. First jobs. Lost jobs. New relationships. Broken relationships. Every time they fell, I was the one who picked them up. When my daughter got engaged, I paid for half the wedding deposit because her fiancé's family wasn't ready to contribute. I spent weekends making centerpieces by hand. I stayed up late ironing tablecloths so she wouldn't have to rent them. At the wedding, she barely introduced me to the guests, too busy showing off the venue I secretly funded. When my son filed for bankruptcy at 28, I stood next to him in court. I paid the fees. I sold my sewing machine, the one old thing I still owned from my younger years, to help him stabilize his life. He promised he'd repay me. He never did. Instead, he later told people I never supported him emotionally. And then came the second divorce of my youngest. His wife took everything. Household items, half the savings, even the couch I bought them as a housewarming gift. He collapsed in my arms that day, sobbing, humiliated. I hired a lawyer for him. Yes, I hired his divorce lawyer. I still remember writing that check. My hand didn't shake then. But it shakes now when he walks past me in my own kitchen and calls me dramatic. Every crisis, every disaster, every mistake, they came to me. And I always opened the door. I always cooked them a meal. I always figured out the money. Always. I never reminded them of the sacrifices. I never said, "Look at what I gave up for you." I didn't need their thanks. I just wanted them to live better than I did. That was my definition of love. But somewhere along the way, they rewrote the story in their minds. They forgot the grocery store shifts. They forgot the sewing shop. They forgot the nights I sat alone at a kitchen table budgeting down to the last cent. They forgot the meals I skipped so they could eat better. They forgot that every birthday, every soccer game, every science fair, every doctor visit, I was there, even when I had no energy left to give. They forgot it all. And when the inheritance arrived, when $18 million fell into their laps, they decided I didn't need much. They decided I had lived my life, and my needs were fewer than theirs. They decided, without hesitation, that I didn't deserve anything. It's strange how the human mind works. How easily people forget the hands that built their future. Not one of them remembered the woman who carried them for 9 months, who sacrificed every part of herself so they could rise higher. Not one remembered the mother who bled herself dry making sure they never missed a chance. They looked at me not as a person, not as someone who shaped their lives, but as an old woman past her use, someone who could be managed, budgeted, controlled. And I realized something painful, something I had avoided acknowledging for years. They didn't value me because I had never asked for anything. Not praise. Not repayment. Not recognition. Not even gratitude. I gave endlessly. And in their eyes, endless giving meant endless supply. To them, I wasn't a mother. I was a resource. A faucet that never stopped running. A wallet that never stayed closed. A presence that never disappeared, no matter how badly they treated it. They didn't forget my sacrifices. They just decided they didn't matter anymore. The will reading should have been the worst part of this entire ordeal. You'd think nothing could sting more than watching your children accept millions while you were left with nothing. But the truth is, the cruelty didn't end there. It only began. It was as if inheriting that money unlocked a new version of them, one that had always been there, hiding beneath politeness and practiced smiles, waiting for the day they no longer needed me. The very next morning, they held a family meeting. I wasn't invited to speak, only to listen. My eldest daughter straightened a stack of papers as though this were a corporate boardroom, not the home where I raised her. After reviewing your lifestyle, she began, in a tone so professional it made my skin crawl, we've decided to set a monthly allowance for you. We? I repeated. Yes, she said, as if I had asked a stupid question. The three of us discussed it last night. We want to make sure you don't overspend or fall behind. She said that last part softly, almost kindly, as if she were doing me a favor. Then she slid the paper toward me. $400. Per month. An amount they debated for almost an hour, arguing over whether $350 would be more appropriate. They talked about me as though I weren't in the room, as though I were some community outreach case they were obligated to support. I don't need an allowance, I finally said, my voice cracking. We're not asking, Mom, my middle son replied. We're telling you what's best. What's best? For a woman who spent decades keeping them alive. Then came the rules. Rules for my life, rules created by the children I once bathed, fed, and held when they woke up screaming from nightmares. First, groceries. They handed me a list of acceptable items, plain cereal, generic bread, vegetables on sale, no unnecessary luxuries. Luxuries like almond milk. Or the honey I used in my tea because my husband liked the taste on my lips when he kissed me. Next, house boundaries. I was told to avoid certain rooms because they planned to remodel and didn't want me messing up the layout. Rooms I had cleaned weekly for 32 years. Rooms where I folded their baby clothes. Rooms where I wrapped their Christmas gifts. Now off limits. Then, clothes. My youngest son glanced at my blouse, frowned, and said gently, we think it's time to dress more appropriately for your age, Mom. Something simpler. Neutral colors. As if I were an embarrassment. As if existing in my own skin offended them. Medicine was next. My daughter looked through my prescription bottles one by one, shaking her head like a disappointed teacher. You're taking too much, she scolded. We'll decide what you actually need. I opened my mouth, but she continued before I could speak. Doctors overprescribe at your age. You'll thank us later. They weren't doctors. They weren't even listening. And yet somehow, they believed they had the right to decide what kept me alive. Finally, guests. I was told not to invite people over too often because it was disruptive. Disruptive. My friends, my last remaining connections to a world where I mattered, were now disruptions. And then came the dagger. Delivered not with hostility, but with horrifying casualness. My daughter-in-law smiled and said, once we remodel the house, we'll figure out where your room goes. Your room. As if I were a distant aunt visiting for a week. As if I were temporary. As if I didn't belong. I felt something crack inside me, a deep, private sorrow, the kind that has no sound. The house that held every memory of my life, was suddenly no longer mine. I looked around the living room. The walls still had faint marks from where my children had bumped their toys as toddlers. The fireplace had soot stains from winter nights when their father and I drank cocoa and watched them open presents. I built this home. I kept it warm, clean, alive. When my husband was too weak to lift a pot, I cooked meals. When he forgot appointments, I reminded him. When he said he wanted the house to always feel like a sanctuary, I made sure it did. And now I was being assigned a room like a guest. It felt like losing my husband all over again. Because the moment they decided what my place was, the moment they discussed me like a responsibility instead of a person, I realized that the love I believed we shared had been replaced by something colder. Something sharp. Something greedy. Their eyes no longer softened when they looked at me. They didn't see the woman who carried them. They didn't see the mother who held their hands. They saw a problem. A cost. An inconvenience. And I knew, with a heaviness in my chest that felt almost suffocating, that this wasn't sudden. Their indifference didn't appear overnight. It grew quietly over the years, fed by entitlement and comfort and the assumption that I would always be there, doing everything, asking for nothing. Maybe that was my mistake, giving too much, too often, without ever asking for respect in return. I made my love too easy. I made my presence too certain. And now they had no value for either. But what broke me wasn't the allowance. Or the rules. Or the dismissive comments. Not even the insult about where my room would go. What broke me was the realization that my children had no idea what love truly was. They believed love was owed to them, not something they had to give back. They believed I had lived my life and it was time for me to shrink into the background of theirs. But there was something they didn't know. Something they couldn't have imagined. While they were busy deciding which corner of their newly renovated home I should occupy, their father had left behind something that didn't belong to them. And when I discovered it, their plans, and their arrogance, would collapse like a house built on sand. Sometimes, when life becomes too loud, the quietest places become a refuge. For me, that place was the basement, dark, cluttered, smelling faintly of old paper and winter coats that had outlived their owners. It wasn't pretty, but it was mine. It was the only part of the house no one tried to remodel, manage, or control. That night, after yet another argument about my expenses, I found myself drifting down the creaking wooden stairs without really thinking. My daughter had accused me of overspending on medicine. My son had scolded me for keeping the heat on too long. My daughter-in-law had said I didn't need anything fancy. Their voices felt like needles pressing into my skin, tiny pricks that didn't draw blood but left invisible bruises. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I simply walked downstairs, needing air even though the basement was the darkest part of the house. But I didn't need light. I needed silence, a moment where no one measured my worth in dollars or inconvenience. The old basement bulb flickered to life above me, casting long shadows across boxes that hadn't been touched in years. Dust floated in the air like drifting memories. I moved a stack of holiday decorations aside, then pushed away an old trunk filled with my children's forgotten toys, toys I had once bought with money I didn't have. As I shifted the trunk, the lid suddenly slipped open and fell backward with a deep thud. Something soft slid out and landed on the concrete floor. An old scarf. My scarf. The one my husband bought me on our 20th anniversary. Burgundy, with delicate gold threads on the edges. I hadn't seen it in years. I reached down, picking it up gently, the fabric still faintly smelling of cedar and thyme. And then I saw it. Underneath the scarf lay a thick, dust-covered burgundy folder. Its edges were frayed. Its corners worn. But the handwriting on the front was unmistakable. My husband's. Not printed. Not typed. Written by hand, the careful, steady penmanship I had memorized over 40 years of shopping lists and birthday cards and love notes slipped into my apron pocket when no one was looking. 3 lines were written on the front in all capital letters. Anna, open only when they fail you. My breath stilled in my chest. For a moment, the entire basement disappeared. The world narrowed until all I could see were those words. My hands trembled as I traced each letter. It felt as though my husband was in the room, whispering in my ear the same way he did during his final days. If they ever fail you, the truth will find you. I had thought he was speaking in riddles, a dying man reaching for poetry. But this folder. This was not poetry. This was intention. This was a plan. My heart pounded as I knelt on the cold concrete floor, the folder heavy in my shaking hands. Dust smeared across my palms as I opened it, the old metal fasteners groaning softly, as if protesting after years of silence. The first page was a property deed. Not the house we lived in. Not anything I recognized. A 14-acre commercial land plot. Purchased 26 years ago. Registered under my name. My name. I blinked, reading it again and again. He never told me. Not once in 26 years did he mention buying land. Not once did he hint at something this large. It was entirely mine, legally, permanently, unquestionably. My breath hitched. Beneath the deed was a small ring of old keys tied with twine, keys of different shapes and ages. One looked like it belonged to a storage unit. Another to an office. A third looked ancient, almost like it unlocked something older than our marriage. Next was a notarized document. Its ink was faded, but his signature was bold and clear. It stated that he had legally transferred his share of the business to me. Not to the children. Not equally distributed. Not conditionally. To me. Signed, witnessed, and stamped. I pressed my hand to my mouth as tears built in my eyes. My husband, my quiet, steady husband, had seen something. Something in our children that I refused to see. Something cold. Something greedy. Something dangerous. He didn't trust them. Not with the business. Not with the land. Not with the legacy he poured his life into. Under the legal papers, I found a safety deposit box access card. My name printed on the front. On the back, in his handwriting. Box 112, keep this safe. The shaking in my hands grew worse. My vision blurred around the edges. My heart hammered against my ribs like it was trying to escape. I reached the final item, a sealed envelope with my name written in the same careful handwriting I had fallen in love with so many years ago. Anna. Just my name. Nothing more. But the way he wrote it felt different, deliberate, heavy, filled with something unspoken. I held the envelope for a long moment, pressing it to my chest. I could almost feel the warmth of his hand lingering on the paper. Almost hear his voice and the sound of my heartbeat. My knees wobbled beneath me. I lowered myself to sit on the floor, the cold concrete grounding me while my mind spun. I opened the envelope with trembling fingers, the seal cracking after years of perfect stillness. I read only the first 2 lines. And my entire world shifted. My chest tightened. My breath disappeared. My vision swam. I had to grip the floor to stop myself from collapsing. He knew. He knew exactly what our children would do. He knew the greed growing inside them long before I did. He knew they would fail me. And the folder, every deed, every key, every document, was his shield around me. A shield I never realized I had. A shield my children knew nothing about. A shield powerful enough to overturn everything they thought they owned. Because the truth inside that folder wasn't just big. It was earth-shattering. And this was only the beginning. I barely slept that night. My mind replayed the same image again and again, the burgundy folder lying open on the basement floor, leaking secrets like light through a cracked door. The land deed. The business transfer. The safety box key. The sealed letter. All of it was overwhelming, like discovering a second life my husband built in shadows, brick by brick, while pretending everything was normal. But the words on the envelope haunted me the most. Open only when they fail you. He knew. He saw the future before I did. And somewhere deep down, it felt like he'd reached out from beyond the grave to steady me. By morning, I knew I had to act. Not out of revenge, not yet, but out of self-preservation. My children had shown me clearly how little they valued me. And if I didn't protect myself now, I'd lose everything, including the last gift my husband left behind. I took the folder, placing it carefully in my handbag, and walked to the law firm my husband trusted during the early years of his business. The sign on the front door hadn't changed. Parker, Stein and Weber. The same brass plate. The same wooden trim. The same quiet professionalism. Mr. Weber, his old friend, his old advisor, was still there. When he saw me walk into his office, something flickered across his face. Recognition. Concern. A softness reserved for someone he respected. He stood to greet me, offering a warm handshake and a sympathetic smile. "It's been a long time, Anna," he said gently. "How can I help you?" I handed him the folder. He didn't ask questions. He simply opened it and began reading. Slowly. Methodically. Silently. The only sounds in the room were the turning pages and the faint humming of the old ceiling fan. His eyebrows tightened. His expression sharpened, as if each new document added weight to a truth he had once hoped would never be needed. When he finally finished, he leaned back in his chair, removed his glasses, and stared at me for a long moment. And then he whispered. "Mrs. Harrison, you are the owner of this land." My heart stumbled. He continued, voice a mixture of disbelief and admiration. "And it's now valued at over $11 million. $11 million. A number so large it didn't feel real. A number my children would never imagine I had any connection to." My jaw trembled. I held the arm of the chair to steady myself. But Mr. Weber wasn't finished. He placed the land deed aside and lifted the notarized document, the business transfer, with both hands. "This," he said slowly, "this changes everything." My voice cracked. "What does it mean?" "It means," he replied, "your husband legally transferred his ownership of the business back to you before he died." "Back to me?" I whispered. "But the will." He shook his head sharply. "The transfer predates the will. And because it's notarized and witnessed, it overrides any distribution listed in the will for those shares." I felt the room tilt. I gripped the chair tighter. He kept reading, flipping to the next paper, the amendment. "As for this amendment," he said, tapping the paragraph with his finger, "your husband wrote it to activate under a specific condition." "What condition?" I asked, even though I suspected the answer. "If your children act with greed, hostility, or neglect toward you," he said. He documented it clearly. And, he turned the page and pointed to a handwritten note. He instructed that any evidence of such behavior be grounds for reversing all decisions in the will concerning them. My breath caught. A mix of sorrow and gratitude burned in my chest. "He knew," I whispered. "He knew what they'd become." Mr. Weber nodded sadly. "He predicted everything." The weight of that truth pressed on me. My husband, quiet and observant as ever, had seen the danger long before I did. He had seen the cracks forming. He had seen the selfishness growing. And he knew that when push came to shove, they would choose greed over love. He didn't leave it to chance. He left me the power to fix it. But Mr. Weber wasn't done. "There's more," he said. "That safety deposit box, we must see what's inside. And I will need to gather documentation, bank statements, letters, witnesses, anything that shows how your children have treated you." "Oh, that won't be difficult," I murmured bitterly. His expression hardened. "What they did, giving you nothing, assigning you an allowance, controlling your medication, this is textbook exploitation of an elderly parent. Judges do not look kindly on that." I swallowed, feeling a mixture of vindication and fear. Vindication because my suffering wasn't imagined. Fear because I knew this would ignite a war. Anna, Mr. Weber said softly, your husband didn't just leave you assets. He left you ammunition. The word hit me like a jolt. Ammunition. Not money. Not property. Ammunition. Because he knew I'd need it. He continued, if your children find out what you have, they will fight. They will accuse you of confusion, coerce you to sign things, or attempt to challenge the documents. You must be prepared. I nodded, my throat tight. Are you afraid? He asked gently. I admitted. But now I feel something else. And what's that? Strength. A small, knowing smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. That's exactly what your husband wanted. He gathered the documents carefully, sealing them in a new protective folder. I'll begin the legal process today. But before anything happens, I need you to brace yourself. This will not stay quiet. When your children find out, chaos will follow. I closed my eyes, inhaling deeply. Chaos. Yes. That's exactly what would happen. They would explode. They would claim I was confused. They would manipulate, threaten, pressure. They would drag my name through mud to protect their greed. But for the first time in months and years, maybe, I didn't feel weak. I felt ready. Mr. Weber stood and walked me to the door. Anna, he said softly, you're not alone in this. Your husband prepared everything. You just need to keep walking forward. Before I left, he added one more thing. When the truth comes out, your children's reactions will reveal exactly who they are. And their reaction will become the evidence we need. A chill ran through me. They would expose themselves. With their own rage. Their own entitlement. Their own behavior. And I would watch, quietly, as everything they believed they controlled began to unravel. And if you're still watching, trust me, the next part will shock you. Because when my children discovered the truth, their greed turned into something far darker, and everything exploded. When the legal notices went out, the transformation in my children was instant, sudden, violent, and almost surreal. The same people who had laughed in that lawyer's office, who had debated my allowance as if budgeting a stranger, suddenly showed up on my doorstep at night, knocking hard enough to rattle the frame. Mom, we're worried about you. That was the first lie. Followed by, you're confused. You misunderstood something. You're being taken advantage of. We're just trying to protect you. They crowded around me in the living room, hovering with practiced concern that felt like cold fingers on my spine. Their eyes darted to the folder in my hands. The greed that once hid beneath politeness now glared openly, stripped of all shame. We need to look at those papers, my eldest daughter insisted, reaching toward the folder. I pulled it away. Her smile cracked. My middle son stepped forward. Mom, don't make this difficult. We just want to help. Another lie. And then came the ugliest one, said in a whisper so vicious it sliced through the room like a blade. You're not thinking clearly anymore. I stared at him. This was the boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, trembling. The boy who once clung to my legs crying on his first day of school. Now he stood towering over me, rewriting my identity to protect his inheritance. That night, I realized something horrible. They weren't fighting for me. They were fighting for the money. And they would do anything to keep it. It didn't take long for them to escalate. Their lawyer filed a petition claiming I was mentally unfit to handle finances. They listed imaginary symptoms: confusion, paranoia, forgetfulness, irrational behavior. They even brought a doctor, a man with a polished suit and practiced sympathy, who claimed I had declining cognitive function. He had never met me before that day. But he testified anyway. My lawyer remained calm, his expression unreadable, his notes organized into neat stacks. He didn't interrupt. He didn't argue. He let them talk, let them build their own noose. The courtroom was cold, the air sharp with tension. I sat quietly, hands folded, watching the people I once loved twist themselves into knots of greed. My daughter took the stand first. She cried, oh, how she cried, tears perfectly timed, perfectly dramatic. I'm just trying to protect my mother, she sniffled. She's been confused. She forgets things. She gets overwhelmed easily. It took everything in me not to laugh. The same woman who told me to stay in my room was now painting me as fragile and lost. Next came my middle son, the one who lectured me about appropriate spending. He spoke with his chin raised, voice trembling just enough to seem emotional. She's making reckless decisions, he said. She's vulnerable. We just want what's best for her. What's best? I wondered if he practiced that line in the mirror. Then my youngest son took the stand. His testimony was a masterpiece of manipulation, dramatic pauses, concerned sighs, longing glances in my direction. She's not the mother she used to be, he said gravely. She's different. No. I wasn't different. I was awake. They spoke for nearly an hour. Their lawyer painted them as saints. The doctor nodded in agreement. The judge took notes quietly. And then, it was our turn. My lawyer stood, unhurried, and opened his folder. Let's begin with the cognitive assessment, he said calmly. A certified specialist had examined me thoroughly. Memory tests. Reasoning tests. Medical review. The results were undeniable. Mrs. Harrison's cognitive function is not only stable, he said, pausing for emphasis, but above average for her age. Silence. He turned another page. Now, let's listen to some recordings. The first audio clip played across the courtroom speakers. My daughter's voice. Mom, just take the allowance and don't make this a problem. My son. She doesn't need money, she barely understands bills. My daughter-in-law. We'll figure out where her room goes after remodeling. Their words echoed loudly, each sentence dripping with entitlement. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. My daughter's face turned pale. She avoided my eyes. My lawyer continued. Here are the bank statements from the last 10 years. He placed them on the judge's desk. These clearly show Mrs. Harrison paid for her children's tuition, medical bills, wedding deposits, bankruptcy fees, and even a divorce attorney. The judge's eyebrows rose. And here, my lawyer said, holding up another document, are the emails they sent each other. He read aloud. If she dies sooner, the assets transfer faster. She doesn't need the house, it's better for resale. Take control of her accounts before she spends something unnecessary. We need to move quickly, she's already asking questions. My chest tightened. Not with pain, with clarity. These weren't mistakes. These were plans. Deliberate. Cruel. Calculated. My lawyer wasn't finished. He held up the amendment, the one my husband had drafted, signed, and notarized. According to this document, Mr. Harrison legally returned all ownership of the business to his wife. This transfer predates the will and overrides any contradictory distribution. He looked directly at my children. And this amendment activates if the children demonstrate greed, hostility, or neglect. The judge leaned forward. Has such behavior been demonstrated? My lawyer gestured toward the evidence table, overflowing with recordings, statements, emails, and years of financial proof. Yes, Your Honor. Extensively. The courtroom fell silent. My daughter's breathing grew ragged. She wiped her eyes, refusing to look at me. My middle son tugged at his collar, face flushed with panic. And my youngest, the most emotional of them, sat frozen, as if realizing for the first time that the world wasn't bending in his direction. But the judge wasn't finished. He turned toward them. "I have one question," he said sternly to my eldest son. "Why did you withdraw large sums from the business account in the last 6 months?" My son opened his mouth, but no sound came. Sweat gathered at his temples. He wiped it, eyes darting around the room for an escape. No escape came. They had walked into court ready to take everything from me. Ready to claim I was confused. Ready to portray themselves as heroes. But in their desperation to seize power, they exposed themselves completely. Courts have a strange stillness right before a verdict. It's the kind of silence that feels alive, like the air itself is listening, holding its breath, waiting for history to tilt in one direction or another. As I sat there, hands folded, nerves buzzing like electric wires under my skin, I looked at the judge's face and knew something irreversible was about to happen. My children shifted in their seats, their former confidence long gone. Their lawyers whispered frantically beside them, flipping pages, pointing at documents, trying to salvage whatever dignity or control they could. But nothing could undo the truth. Nothing could erase the recordings. Nothing could explain the bank withdrawals or the manipulation or the emails dripping with greed. And then, finally, the judge spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried through the courtroom with the weight of a falling hammer. "This court finds that Mrs. Anna Harrison is fully competent." The words sliced through the tension like a blade. He continued. "And beyond competent, she appears to be rational, clear-thinking, and highly capable of managing her own affairs." My children froze. "And furthermore," the judge said, lifting the amendment with steady hands, "this document, prepared by Mr. Harrison prior to his passing, is legally binding. Therefore..." He paused just long enough for the room to tighten with anticipation. "Mrs. Harrison is the rightful and sole owner of the disputed assets, including the business shares, the commercial land, and all financial entities previously contested." My middle son's jaw dropped open. My daughter clutched the edge of the table as if the wood might hold her upright. My youngest looked as though his soul had left his body. But the judge wasn't done. He looked directly at them, not at their lawyers, not at the evidence, but at them, and said the sentence that still echoes in my mind. "Her children acted with clear greed and manipulation." The truth was spoken. Publicly. Legally. Undeniably. Their lawyers froze mid-breath. Their lies crumbled. Their arrogance dissolved into panic. Seconds later, the judge delivered the final blow. "All business shares, land, and withheld assets shall revert to Mrs. Harrison immediately." Immediately. Not pending appeal. Not after negotiations. Not after mediation. Immediately. Just like that. In a single sentence. The $18 million they claimed as theirs was gone. The silence that followed was almost holy. A silence filled with shock, with justice, with consequence. My children left the courtroom without looking at me. Heads down, faces flushed with humiliation, they shuffled past reporters and lawyers and spectators who had watched the truth unfold like a slow-burning fire. They didn't offer apologies. They didn't speak a word. They didn't ask if I needed help or if I was okay. They simply walked away. Just as they had walked away from responsibility. And love. And every sacrifice I ever made. But I stood taller than I had in years. I left that courthouse not as an old woman who needed managing. Not as a burden. Not as a shadow in their lives. But as Anna Harrison. The rightful heir to the legacy my husband built. And the woman he loved enough to protect even after death. My life changed in the days that followed. I moved out of the house that had become a cage of memories and control. I bought a bright apartment overlooking a quiet park, wide windows, sunlight pouring in each morning, wooden floors that didn't creak in fear of who was walking on them. The first night I spent there, I slept with the windows open, letting the breeze whisper through the curtains. I didn't dream of courtrooms or arguments or my children's cold faces. I dreamed of my husband's laughter. It was the first peaceful sleep I'd had in years. I took back the business, my business. The employees welcomed me with warm smiles and relief. They had suspected something was wrong when my children began visiting the office, asking intrusive questions, digging through files. Now, with me in charge, the atmosphere shifted. People felt safe again. I didn't make dramatic changes. I didn't fire anyone. I didn't rearrange the structure. I simply restored the values my husband had built the company upon: honesty, effort, loyalty. The same values my children chose to abandon. I began traveling, short trips at first. A bed and breakfast by the coast. A quiet retreat in the mountains. And then, slowly, I ventured further, visiting places my husband always dreamed of but never got to see. I carried his photo in my purse wherever I went. I painted too, something I hadn't done since I was a girl. I set up a small easel by the living room window and painted scenes from my morning walks. Soft yellows. Deep blues. Merlot reds. Colors that reminded me of the scarf that had hidden the folder that had saved me. Every morning, I made coffee the way he liked it, a little strong, a little sweet. I placed a cup across from me at the table. People might call it sentimental, even foolish, but it made me feel like he was still there, sitting with me, watching me reclaim the life he wanted for me. And sometimes, when the apartment was quiet, and the air was still, I would open the burgundy folder again. Not for the deeds. Not for the transfer papers. Not for the financial security it gave me. But for the letter he wrote. The one that began with my name. And ended with a love so deep. It outlasted his pulse. That folder wasn't just proof of ownership. It was proof that someone, somewhere, once loved me enough to plan for the day I would stand alone. That folder wasn't wealth. It was devotion. It was protection. It was truth. And it reminded me of something I had forgotten. I was worth fighting for. I always had been. And before I tell you what I did with the first million, tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? And if you want more stories like this, stay with me. There's so much more to tell.